Hey everyone! I decided to take on the trans cult, and I am going to, like all trans women, be a man who throws on dresses and lipsticks and claims he's a woman. If you're really gonna say all journeys are valid, then you must accept this. And Joe Rogan sung my praises and talked about how perfect the troll was.
Yours was even more ridiculous. Barely no one believed it from the start.
I think the left is very good at using fear to get medical professionals to lie to people. This body positivity movement is just as noxious and just as toxic. We just don't want to be forced to affirm delusions, and we don't want our children drug into it.
You mentioned you have a trans niece, for example. You must have started receiving some pushback, right? Did you worry at all that this could limit future opportunities for you?
A real transgender is actually a misnomer, right?
I feel like you kind of backtracked on this a little bit.
The only sort of men who find interest in doing an elaborate social experiment are autogynephiles.
The simplest explanation is always the right explanation. Why is he leaving sanest comments that are meant to shame me?
All right, Josh Seiter, the most fabulous trans woman in the world. Welcome to my podcast. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Well, I think a lot of my audience will be familiar with you and your stunt and what's going on now. But just for anyone who's not, why don't you give me a bit of background on kind of what led us to having this conversation?
Yeah, so about 7 or 8 months ago, I decided to take on the trans cult. I've seen a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of gaslighting on the part of the trans movement and gender ideologists, trying to convince the public that trans-identified men magically become women because they say they have a gender identity that differs from their biological sex. And I also saw the movement start to change from simply claiming they could change their gender to then claiming they could actually change their sex. And so I got fed up with it. And I said, you know what? I want to call these people out. But if I do, just using ration and logic, I'll be labeled a bigot because they can't debate on the merits. So they always resort to hurling insults at people. And I don't want to get discredited as a transphobic bigot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mock it from the inside out, kind of like a Trojan horse. And I am going to, like all trans women, be a man who throws on dresses and lipsticks and claims he's a woman. Hey everyone! Hey everyone! Hey everyone! Hey everyone! Hey everyone! I just wanted to jump on here and talk for a second about my facial and body hair. I'm gonna keep it. I like my facial and body hair. Not everyone has dysphoria over the same things. And from the inside out, I'm kind of going to expose it for how absurd it is. And that's what I proceeded to do over the next 6 months on my Instagram. Every few days, I would post a video of me saying, I am a woman, and I'd be walking around in a dress and makeup. And then after the 6 months, I revealed that, like all trans women, I'm still just a dude that was wearing dresses and makeup. And we're all in the same boat, and we're all just men at the end of the day.
Right. Cool. Thanks for that. I would agree with a lot of the premise of what you did in terms of shining a light on this notion that you cannot question whether someone is trans or not because, trans women are women, but woman is whoever identifies as one. It's not defined by makeup or hair or no matter what stage of your transition you're at, you're still trans. So I think that premise was a good one. Obviously, we can talk about how it played out. But I guess in your life, was there a turning point in relation to these topics, trans, gender, in which you started to kind of peak and question things? I mean, what was your journey? And then were there any particular people you took inspiration from? I can think of a couple, but I'd like to kind of understand your perspective.
Yeah, so mine really just, I'd say it started with education. I'm educated. I have an undergrad degree in sociology and political science. I went on to get my Juris Doctor or law degree in law school. And so, I like to think of myself as a critical thinker and someone that's intelligent and not capable of being easily gaslit. And so my questions and queries into this cult kind of started with that because I was being told patently false things all the time, like trans identified men are women all of a sudden. And so then it became even much more personal, though, because I have nieces and nephews. And they're 5, and at the time they were 5 and 7 years old. And I started seeing YouTube Kids ads as well as Disney Plus ads propagating this propaganda of non-binary and gender fluid and trans, and it was in the form of fish cartoons. And it was the fish saying that they weren't boy or girl, they were non-binary. And I said, you know what, this is disgusting. If people want to dress, if men want to throw on dresses, I don't care. But if they're going to start trying to brainwash our kids and future generations into this cult, then I have a problem with it. And if they're going to demand me and my kids' active participation in it, I'm going to have a bigger problem with it. And then I'd say another aggravating factor was I have another niece who's 22 and she is trans. And so I have watched what her membership in the cult has done over the last 10 years. And it's been very disturbing. And I would say another aggravating factor was my experience with mental health. I've been a mental health advocate for a decade online. That's how I got started blogging about mental health. And so I think men's mental health is very important. I think treating thought disorders is very important. And I think correcting faulty thinking is very important. And because I value mental health and because of my personal experiences, I felt very strongly about this issue, and that's kind of why I decided to tackle it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, my motivations are not too dissimilar in terms of seeing what was happening for me, especially to gay kids being sterilized, with me being gay, and the fact that not enough people are challenging this. And it does, yeah, I think it does sound pretty crazy to someone who is on the peripheral of this, just thinks, so you need to be nice. Some people are like this. When you use words like propaganda and gaslighting, because that kind of implies that it's this sort of psyop, this sort of Soviet Union style esque, ideology that people are unaware they're subsuming. But I really actually do think that it's sort of one of those things. And if you let it get out of hand and you make people believe that one sex can become another sex, like there's no limit to what you can make people believe, right?
Well, and there's nothing kind and compassionate if someone with body dysmorphia were to ask for help and they were told by the medical community at large and their therapist that they should start mutilating their limbs so that they can achieve the desired result because of their body dysmorphia. There would be nothing kind and compassionate about an anorexic person being told to take diet pills and get liposuction so that he can live out his delusions about being fat at 80 pounds. There'd be nothing kind and compassionate about giving a schizophrenic man a gun and a knife so that he can fight off non existent CIA members that he thinks are trailing him. So we don't engage the delusions or entertain or actively participate in the delusions of any other mental illness, only this one. And I think it's really instructive when you look at the disparate ways in which body dysmorphia and gender dysphoria are treated. And you see that body dysmorphia is treated with restructuring the faulty and false thinking about your body and the perceptions about your body. But when it comes to gender dysphoria, people in the medical community will actually get in trouble if they correct the faulty thinking someone has about their gender or now even their sex. And you can't do that. Instead, these people end up being taken down a path of self-mutilation. And I think when you then overlay that onto the issue of children and teens that are also being brought down this path, it becomes even more egregious. And when you consider the fact that many of these young people are just maybe have homosexual propensities or predilections, and many of them are on the spectrum and are autistic. When you take all of those considerations into account, it's really a travesty what's happening.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting hearing you talk about this, to be honest, because your videos about it are so, they're so dumb and kind of mocking that someone stumbling across it wouldn't necessarily know that you thought this deeply about it. So I think that's quite interesting. Something you say about the body dysmorphia thing, yeah, I completely agree with that. With the kind of fat positivity, healthy at any size, I think that's heading in a similar territory because some people on such an extreme end of that actually believe that risks to health and obesity is a myth, and it's kind of fat phobia. It's all about society's fault, why you don't feel good about yourself. you kind of mentioned this is the only thing that we sort of affirm, but would you agree that that's sort of analogous in some way?
Subscribe to my Substack, Jack Jewell Uncut. This is where you will get my full, uncut, untamed, and unashamed takes too controversial for YouTube, including early access to all videos, a private members chat where you can talk to me, and bonus footage seen nowhere else, including this episode.
Have you aligned more to the right or Republican throughout your life?
So now
You have a bit of a history of being on reality TV, people thinking you were dead. Let's try to be honest here, right? You are desperate for attention and followers, and this was something you saw as a vehicle to achieving that fame. But what about you? Because you're deflecting now.
professional.
So what do you think about someone who believes my right arm is foreign to me? For me to be happy and live my truth, my arm needs to be gone. Or how about, legalizing drugs?
Link on screen and in the description.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a great point, but this body positivity movement is just as noxious and just as toxic of an exception to the general rule of treating and disabusing people of their false impressions surrounding their bodies. So I think the so-called trans and body positivity are two glaring exceptions to how we usually treat these things, and it's ending in ridiculously terrible results where you have people that, instead of being told, hey, look, your weight's out of control and it's causing a myriad of issues, you have high blood pressure, you're having trouble breathing, you're now susceptible to a host of other things, heart disease, heart condition, they're being told, no, it's okay. And they're being told that because everyone is so fearful of being called fat phobic. Just like anyone who tells a mentally ill man, hey, you're not a woman because you have a mental illness, they're also very afraid of getting in trouble. And so I think the left is very good at using fear to get medical professionals to lie to people. And the body positivity movement that you bring up is another great example of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you started this experiment, let's start first. So before we get into the online reaction and obviously go into as much or little detail as you like, even in my case, talking videos, kind of reacting to stuff, not necessarily putting on an act like you do, have faced, as you can imagine, a lot of struggles in my personal life. People who hate it, people who think I'm a Nazi now. So, you mentioned you have a trans niece, for example. You don't have to get into specifics, but I can imagine you must have started receiving some pushback, right?
Yeah, I've gotten pushback from a number of people. My circle is very small. So in my personal life, there's not a whole lot of pushback. But from the online community, I've gotten a lot of pushback. And so I get death threats all the time, and my inbox is always flooded with people that are very angry. And I think they're angry because they see that what I'm doing is very effective. And I'm holding up a mirror to the trans community and to the far left cult. And I'm saying, look, if you're really going to say all journeys are valid and that science is all about self-ID and self-declarations, then you must accept this. And you must accept me because we are all the same. We are men putting on dresses and lipstick and saying we're women. And in fact, the medical guidelines say that you don't need to transition to be valid. You don't need to take hormones. You don't need to get surgery. You don't even need to have gender dysphoria. The NIH, NHS, WHO, Planned Parenthood, Mayo Clinic, all of them say that to be a valid trans person, all you need to do is articulate a gender identity that differs from your biological sex. And so if we're really going to trust the science, then anytime Josh Seiter says he's a woman, you must accept it if this is the route you want to go down. And I think it's because I kind of show them the absurdity of all of it that I get so much hate and pushback from them.
For sure. Did you worry at all that this could limit future opportunities for you? Like if someone does something like that?
I'm aware that, calling out this dangerous cult could cause people to be upset at me or not want to associate with me down the line, but I don't care about that. I will happily sacrifice, monetary gain or some future opportunity if it means telling the truth about a dangerous cult that I think is putting future generations in jeopardy. And when you look at young kids on a gurney table, 5 years old, and their parents are gleefully posting that they're getting puberty blockers, or they're trans and this is their first doctor appointment for XYZ. Everything else doesn't really matter. So yes, I'm aware that maybe future opportunities could be hurt by it, but I wouldn't consider those opportunities if I have to genuflect at the altar of the trans cult. I don't want those
Mhm, mhm.
opportunities.
Yeah, I feel similar to that, to be honest. And I think we'll look back in horror at this one day. You know, human history is full of scandal after scandal and, making societies believe all sorts of things, but we don't seem to. I think what we're facing now in the West is this kind of arrogance towards our liberalism and our freedom. And we think it's just not possible that, we'll become sort of some communist society that believe things that aren't true. And I know that sounds really crazy, but to protect liberty, you always need to be cognizant of that, right?
Yeah, I think you always have to remain vigilant. And some of the most vocal and outspoken people I see speaking out, not just against the trans cult, but the woke mob in general, tend to be immigrants from countries that are communist or used to be communist, whether it's the Soviet bloc or somewhere in Latin America. They are very vocal about the woke mob here because there are so many parallels to what went on in their country, where you must fall in line with the orthodoxy in the dominant narrative or else. And they are kind of seeing what they saw in their home countries 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they're seeing it with the radical left, and they're saying we don't want any part of this because we know where this can go. And so I think absolutely you're right that people are very arrogant in thinking that we can't turn into a totalitarian country. But Mark Zuckerberg was just on Joe Rogan today, and he just admitted about an hour ago that the Biden administration was telling them that even if statements were true about the vaccines, Meta could not publish it. They were not allowed to publish it. And so that right there is symptomatic of the totalitarian nature of our government and how close we are to getting to that kind of dystopian world that you're describing. So I think people really need to be more alert. And I think we're far too lax, and not enough of us are outraged at the fact that kids as young as 4 and 5 years old in public schools are being taught this gender ideology nonsense and garbage, and it has no place in our schools.
Mhm. Yeah, that's terrifying. And I tell you, the UK is worse, which you've probably seen some stuff coming out of here. Let me challenge you a bit now. So with your hoax, your stunt, whatever you want to call it, one criticism I hear from a lot of people is, while some of those principles you talked about were correct, and I agree with that. When I think of Dylan Mulvaney, his whole thing up to this day could not be more ridiculous in terms of wanting to be affirmed. But what people will say is yours was even more ridiculous, and barely no one believed it from the start. They'll say, if anyone did, they were, a very fringe minority that believed. So what would you have to say to that?
Well, first, I would say that's patently false. When I opened my phone today, even though my revealing this was all a troll was 2 months ago, when I opened my phone today, I see hundreds of comments, new comments saying, oh my God, go girl, or this is amazing, or hold up, wait, I'm not sure if you're real trans or not. There is a very healthy, very robust discussion going on even today, 2 months after the reveal, about whether I'm trans or not. And back then, it was even more robust before the reveal. So that just isn't true that it was a fringe minority. Secondly, I would say let's just assume it was a fringe minority. What I did was within the medical guidelines and according to the science to a T. No pun intended. And so, even if not a lot of people believed it, what the science says is that is valid. A man can just self declare and self identify as a woman, and in over 21 states in America, that new identity has to be respected. So, you don't have to believe my troll, you don't have to find it credible, but just that fact alone, that in 21 states, self ID is the law of the land, and the fact that self ID is the science now, and you don't even need to transition to be trans, that alone should cause people to pause.
Oh,
But there is a very healthy debate even today about whether my posts were genuine or not.
yeah.
So a lot of people don't know that I did the reveal.
Yeah, in some ways I agree in terms of the principle being in line with the rules, right? I agree with that. I would be very skeptical of the comments you're talking about because, having a look through your Instagram, I see a lot of people in the comments sort of joining in on your hoax because they think it's funny, because they're like, "Oh, you go girl," as in they sort of are relishing in the same fantasy and calling this out. So I guess there's no real way of knowing. And I think the trans activists would say, oh, well, what matters is if they're sincere. As in that's the only rule I think they have is like
I
they have
want
to
to
be
talk about
sincere.
that. Yeah,
Go on.
I think you bring up a great point. The biggest criticism I get is, Josh, you weren't really trans. Well, why? Well, because it wasn't sincere. Oh, so I have to be truly delusional. And that's when the magic pixie dust comes in and I become a real woman. That's when the transformative power comes, is when I'm truly delusional and mentally ill. So they want us to believe that Josh isn't a woman because he's too rational and logical. Josh would only be a woman if he were a little more mentally ill. Well, I'm sorry, but that doesn't give me much faith in the trans movement, that there's a threshold and a litmus test for being mentally ill enough to magically become a woman. This whole thing is utter nonsense. And yes, that is essentially what they're saying. Josh was far too rational and far too calculated to be truly trans, which is just another way of saying that trans people are mentally ill people that have faulty thinking and have fallacious thoughts, and that thinking needs to be corrected. But it in no way imbues them with a magical power that makes them become a woman. And I think most people know that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Plus, also, I mean, you can argue the semantics, but I think it's hard to see when Dylan Mulvaney started that being more sincere than yours. You know what I mean?
I'm the bearded lady. Dylan was more tongue in cheek than I was. Dylan was more mocking of women. Dylan, I would argue, was just as masculine looking as me. And so there's no and that yet Dylan is celebrated and Dylan is considered a valid woman. And I think there's no difference between the two of us. I would say the only reason he's celebrated and I'm not is because he is part of the left. He's part of the woke mob, and they love him for that. And from the very beginning, even when I was dressing up as a woman, I was identifying as a libertarian, and I think that upset a lot of
Mhm,
people.
mhm. Let's look at an interesting point here, right? Because one group I feel like really got angry at you were the, I'm going to call them true trans. You said something on Alex Stein, then you got pushback from people like Buck Angel. Buck is a friend of mine. People like Alexis Blake. People who were claiming that, well, the trolling you're doing is true when it comes to people like Dylan Mulvaney and non-binary people, but I'm really trans. So let's see what you had to say.
A real transgender is actually a misnomer, right? For people that claim to have a hold on the science, they're horrible at lexicology and etymology, and they use these semantical games to try to confuse people, and they're always changing the meaning of words and things like that. And so he doesn't even understand that it's his own community that has set these rules, and I'm just playing within the limits of those rules.
I did watch your video with Buck, and I feel like you kind of backtracked on this a little bit, and I'm a bit skeptical of that. I kind of wonder if you were, leaning into a bit of empathy there, because me and Buck will disagree on a bit, but I still really like Buck, and I will use him for Buck because I feel like Buck is pretty with it. So, what are your thoughts on this now?
Yeah, so I don't disagree with what I said there. It is Buck's own community that has set these loose, nebulous guidelines that allows anyone to self-ID into womanhood, and people should be outraged about it. What I was wrong about is at the time, I didn't know who Buck Angel was, and so I thought that he was part of the majority of his movement, which is like 99% of them, who think that anyone can just self-ID into the opposite sex. And he does not believe that. He believes sex is immutable. You cannot change your sex. And I have since learned a lot about Buck, and I actually respect Buck a lot. And I was not aware that he was a very small minority within his community. And because he's so pragmatic and practical illogical. His own community has ostracized him, and he's a pariah now. And that speaks to how dangerous this cult is, that they're willing to do that to one of their own members simply because their own member speaks the truth.
Yeah. So I think when we have this kind of gender ideologue to sex realist spectrum, I would kind of see Buck sitting somewhere here. And I'm not saying this is what Buck would say directly, but the argument that I hear is, well, what about people who actually have gender dysphoria and actually need to transition in order to be happy? What do you think of that? Like, do you have criticisms of that as an idea, or do you believe in this concept of kind of true gender dysphoria and true medical treatment?
I believe that we should first, like with any other thought disorder, and again, I would use body dysmorphia and anorexia, bulimia, schizophrenia, we should try to disabuse the person of their fallacious thinking, and we should try to correct that thinking. If that does not work, and I do not doubt that Buck may be one of those people where cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy would not be effective, and they feel like Buck that the only way they can be happy and be at peace is to transition, I'm all for it because I'm a libertarian and any adult should be allowed to do whatever they want to do so long as it isn't harming anyone else. Now, where I draw the line and the reason the trans cult has lost so many of us is they not only want to be able to do what they want, they are demanding our active participation in what they're doing and our children's participation and women's participation in it to the detriment of women and children. And that's where I would draw the line. But if it would make Buck and other true trans people happy to do what they want to do, fine. But do not weaponize the language against us. Do not change the meaning of words and don't gaslight us into thinking we're being bigoted or transphobic when we refuse to indulge and entertain your delusions. And that's the problem.
Yeah, so you mentioned a few things there. Some I agree with, some I disagree, and I'm always trying to make up my mind about this because it's a difficult thing. And there's a side of me that really wants to cling on to the idea of, oh well, some people need this, because I just think to believe the opposite seems to me like such an extreme kind of hardline position, and we do have people like that. So I'm trying to keep myself open-minded. So a few criticisms of what you'd say. Well, first of all, I would say I don't believe in true trans. I don't think anyone's born with a destiny to develop gender dysphoria. I think various conditions in your life can bring about struggling and trauma, and sometimes you understand your experience through this idea of gender dysphoria, which actually we're selling to people as a medical industry, because if before these ideas really existed, people would not necessarily understand their plight through this framework of like, oh, this is gender dysphoria, therefore I'm trans. And I think that existing in itself is actually spurring on additional dysphoria, because it allows people to become obsessive, to buy into a label, to believe that there is this magical cure, right? And I think it's difficult to kind of separate the two, because while I think there are some people who've done this who seem to benefit and have good lives, that's not to say that, maybe their life could have taken another path if they were given some other treatment, right? But I do think one argument is, well, you have the moderate position of people who do this, but they know they're still a man. But can you argue that this medical model is what got us here? Is this what got us to these ideas, that this kind of propaganda, this enforcement of these ideas? And then if these medical interventions come with such harsh consequences for the body, how can we offer them medically? Like, do you see this moving towards more cosmetic kind of thing? So I know I kind of touched on a lot there, but essentially what I'm saying is, can you separate the two truly? And also, does anyone really benefit from this as a whole? Let's look at their lives as a whole, right? Because they might be good right now, but what about in 30 years when they've been taking estrogen and their bodies had no testosterone for 30 years and they get cancer or whatever? I think that's something we really need to answer.
Yeah, so, to draw another analogy, there's people that want to get pec and calf implants. And that's been going on for 30 years that I'm aware of, since I was a little kid. And, taking pro hormones and steroids to change their body. And my whole adult life, I've never had a problem with that. I may think it's stupid. I may think it's reckless. I think it's dangerous. But if somebody in America wants to get calf implants or hack off their chest or get pec implants because they're a bodybuilder, I don't care. I wouldn't do it. I don't want them talking to my kids about it. I don't want them teaching it at school. I don't want the teacher coming into my kid's class and talking about how he has body dysmorphia, so he got calf implants. In much the same manner, I do not care if someone thinks that they're going to be happy if they hack off their chest or hack off their lower body parts. I don't want to know about it. I don't want them talking about it in school books, and I don't want teachers coming into the class and talking to the kids about it. And I don't want to be told that I have to actively participate in this person's pursuit of the perfect body. And so I think this kind of transcends, no pun intended, the trans movement. There's many people that want to change their body in different ways with body modifications, and tattoos and surgeries. And I think they can do whatever they want. Again, I don't want the rest of society to be forced to interact with them and to participate in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is another fan question, and I was going to just ask you, but then I actually have some footage here which sums it up. So this is about a minute and a half, but let's go.
You can do whatever you want, but don't make your fetish my truth.
The only sort of men who find interest in doing an elaborate social experiment are autogynephiles, aka men who are aroused at the idea or the thought of themselves as women. He has a history of dating trans women, so that means he has a gynoandromorphophilia, or a paraphilic interest in the sort of she-male body and feminized males, etc. If you are, as a man, are attracted to trans women, there's a good chance that you have a degree of autosexuality, such that your attraction to trans women gets turned inward, such that you are attracted to the idea of yourself becoming a trans woman. People had noticed and commented on the fact that he always put a lot of effort into his, sort of fake trans women. Like, he would always sort of, be, more tasteful in his clothing choices. Like, he would buy like outfits that sort of flattered his like very masculine body and stuff, more put together as like a crossdresser than like your average like low effort crossdresser who's just like totally doing it as like a joke. That social experiment that Josh did ended about a month or so ago, but rather than sort of like ending the social experiment, people have noticed that Josh continues the social experiment. So if it was a social experiment and he had no gender issues, no underlying autogynephilic predisposition that was driving him towards transition, like, why would he continue to post himself? You can see crow's feet. You can't fake crow's feet. Crow's feet indicate when your eyes are smiling is when you get the crow's feet in your eyes. That reflects genuine happiness. So he's genuinely getting a sense of autogynephilic euphoria.
I have to say, what was making me laugh there was just watching you. So that was a lot. But what do you have to say?
I love these delusional leftists. What's so great about them is they have, because of during my social experiment, and even today, they continue to make what they used to call right-wing tropes. And they say things like, Josh, you're nothing more than a mentally ill man. And I say, you think trans women are just mentally ill man? Well, they'll say, Josh, you just have autogynephilia. You're just a man with autogynephilia. And I say, oh, you think trans women are just dudes with autogynephilia? So they're always subconsciously making our own points for us. And that's what I was trying to do.
I will just say for context, right? Because I know Ray, who's in that. So he's not a woke leftist. He actually used to be trans. He's a detransitioner and he used to believe in all of the ideology. He's accepted the fact that he has autogynephilia, and he talks about it publicly because to try and kind of raise awareness about it so that, other men don't think transition is the answer. And I know that you believe autogynephilia is a real thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's where he doesn't believe in any of the woke like ideology stuff, but he believes that yes, you did this hoax and perhaps the intentions are still true, but it's a bit of a bonus that you've got to live out your kind of fantasy, your cross-dressing that's given you a kick. That's what he thinks.
I think he has far too much time on his hands. Just listening to him talk about the crow's feet and, the fact that I keep trolling the left and somehow that's demonstrable proof that I have this disorder, autogynephilia. I just think it's hilarious. And I always say, just follow Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is always the right explanation. And I promise you, and I don't care if anyone believes me, that the simple explanation is I think it's hilarious to troll the left, and I think it's hilarious to hold a mirror up to the trans movement and say, "Welcome to the clown show. You're not the only ones that can be clowns. These are the rules. I'll play by them too." And so I throw on makeup and lipstick and a dress and say I'm a woman. They have to accept it, and they have to see that I'm just holding a mirror up to them and their behavior and
Mm.
reciprocating it. That is the simplest explanation. People don't have to believe it. And I would say to this person, so what? What if I have autogynephilia? Are you trying to shame me? Are you an autogynephilia phobic individual? That seems pretty myopic and narrow minded. Assuming arguendo, I do have autogynephilia. Why is he leaving sanest comments that are meant to shame me for my autogynephilia? That doesn't seem very progressive of him. So let's just say I do have it. I think that's a very bigoted, narrow minded person to be making those comments about someone that's struggling with something. So
Mm.
I really don't get the end point he's trying to make. I think either way he loses. But no, I don't have autogynephilia. I just smile in the post because I think it's hilarious to troll these people, and everyone else thinks it's hilarious. That's why it's gotten hundreds of millions of views, and that's why all my videos on Instagram have millions of views and tens of thousands of comments because everybody thinks it's hilarious. And the only people that don't find it funny are boring, humorless leftists and people like this person that is angry at themselves for being a detransitioner, is very unhappy in their own personal life and has never done anything of any import. And because I have, and it's getting recognized all around the world, they have to try to rain on it. And it's fine. I think it's funny. I love that they're sitting there analyzing a video of me in a bikini and speculating that I have autogynephilia. I think the whole thing is absolutely hilarious, and I love that videos like this are being made, and that's why I continue to do what I do, and that's why I say I'm transracial and I wear blackface, because I love that these videos are still coming out and that people can't wrap their heads around the fact that Josh Seiter's doing this. He must be a sick individual, and I think it's all hilarious. And I would say, oh, so you're just saying trans people are sick individuals? So again, they prove our points for us.
There you go. Well, you should watch a little. I'm just going to defend Ray a little bit because he is a very nice person and he thinks very deeply about autogynephilia from a scientific point of view. Because
Oh, I can tell it's on
Oh.
his mind a lot, because for him to say that I have autogynephilia, it must be the most pressing, heavy thing on his mind for him to project that onto the troll that I did and surmise that I have a subconscious autogynephilia that I'm trying to live out. It's the most ludicrous thing I've heard, but I'm sure they're a great person, probably fun to hang out with.
yeah, I mean, he thinks it's important that men with autogynephilia know they have it because then it's less likely that they're gonna be tempted to transition, right? Because they actually know what they're dealing with, right? But one criticism I can agree with is
It's good.
something I noticed with kind of self-aware autogynephiles is they like, I mean, I don't know if they like it, but they seem determined to prove that a lot of people have autogynephilia, if you know what I mean. So sometimes I think they're right, sometimes I think they might be wrong.
Well, that would make
Um,
sense, and I think not only do most trans people have autogynephilia, or at least trans women, I think there are a lot of so-called trans people that are malingering and that have Munchausen syndrome or have Munchausen syndrome by proxy and are using their kids, and so I do think that there is a lot of undiagnosed mental illness at play, so at least they're bringing that valid point up.
mhm. Well, Josh, this has been absolutely great, and I appreciate, you really seem to know your stuff on it. You speak about it with conviction, and I think that's a great thing, whether people agree or disagree with whatever you do. Um, and yeah, so thank you for being here. And I guess what is next for you? More hoaxes, or do you have anything planned?
Well, thanks so much, and I appreciate you having me on. And so coming up, I just did Alex Stein yesterday. Like I said the other day, Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn were discussing my social experiment. I will be on Tim Pool's Timcast on the 27th. I will be on the Digital Social Hour on the 29th. And from here, I just hope to continue the dialogue. You know, a lot of people say, why did you do what you did? I wanted to open a discussion because I think when people claim or posit that men magically become women, we should be allowed to question it. We should be allowed to have a conversation about that. And so that's why I did what I did, to provoke thoughtful discussion and to open a dialogue about it. So I hope to continue to just have that dialogue, continue to come on podcasts, continue to talk to people who I disagree with and agree with. And I think it's just so important, especially in America and places like Canada and the UK, where there's really been a chilling effect on free speech and open dialogue. I think it's so important now more than ever that we be able to have conversations about these things. So thanks for having me on your show so that we could do that.
No problem. Would you ever make kind of more serious videos on your Instagram? Because obviously you know a lot, right? You speak well.
Yeah, I'd be willing to. In my story highlights, I have hundreds of slides about mental health. Mental health, as I said, is something that's very important to me. And so I expound on cognitive behavioral therapy in those story highlights. They're available in my bio. But I'm open to making funnier videos. Obviously, social media caters to and favors short form content. And it always helps if there's humor in it. And I personally enjoy making points through the use of satire and through the use of parody. And I think it's very effective. I think it has been very effective, but I wouldn't be against taking a more serious approach, but I kind of save that for podcasts and interviews. And then I kind of use social media for the more satirical points I want to make.